Hey folks, Wrong Gamgee here. I just want to briefly announce that the Quick and Dirty RPG system is now available on DriveThruRPG for $4.99. That's almost a 40% price reduction from its original retail price of $8, which makes it easier for you to get a copy of my labor of love to the RPG hobby in your preferred devices. Also, don't forget to grab a copy of the Quick and Dirty character sheets and other profiles at a price of pay what you want. The links to both products are in the description. Now, onto the video. Greetings folks, this is Wrong Gamgee and welcome to Quick and Dirty Roleplaying. In this video, I'll talk about what gets me immersed and what breaks my immersion when playing a tabletop role-playing game. The catalyst for this video topic has been me reflecting on my moment-to-moment experience as I'm going through the Fabula Ultima Press Start PDF by myself so that I can get an experiential understanding on the rules, on combat, and what it's like to play a tabletop RPG based on emulating a JRPG, a Japanese role-playing game for those not in the know. In my transcribed playthrough, I've been following along each scene, writing out the GM narration text as well as the player's narration text. Since I have to generate the content for the player's narration text myself, I have to draw from the content present by both the GM narration text and the info presented in each pre-generated character sheet for context. From there, emergent creation occurs, and that's not only when I'm most immersed in the game, but when I find myself the most present. I feel activated. This feeling of activation through emergent content creation is what I chase when I play tabletop role-playing games. I think it would be safe to equate this feeling of activation that I describe with the psychological state of flow. As the Fabula Ultima Press Start is designed so that the group can learn how to play Fabula Ultima piece by piece, the first rules that come up are attribute checks. Fabula Ultima's attribute checks are selecting a combination of two attributes that make the most sense for the situation at hand. So the way that the player describes how they do something is paramount in determining what two attributes are tested, even if it's the same attribute twice. In effect, this feels very similar to using approaches from, say, Fate or Powered by the Apocalypse games, where the emphasis on how is more prevalent than what single skill matches the task at hand. As a consequence, following on the how draws me more into the narrative because I can't get away with a detached announcement of the game mechanic I'm invoking in order to resolve what's happening in the narrative at that moment. I can't simply say, I roll for lockpicking, when I want to pick the lock without having the proper key. I describe what my character is doing, and the GM translates that into the attribute check or approach test that most corresponds to my description. If I wanted to maximize my chances of success, then I'll describe what my character is doing in a way that accentuates my most potent traits, which requires rhetorical skill more than mathematical or tactical skill. Speaking of, the more I'm engaged in the activity of rhetoric in a tabletop role-playing game, the longer I remain immersed and activated. Likewise, the less engaged in the activity of rhetoric in a tabletop role-playing game, the less immersed and activated I am until I come to the surface and start to dry off, so to speak. While it can be a relief at times to do so, the longer I find myself not immersed, the longer I find myself not engaged and therefore not in that state of flow. This happens because I find myself in a different activity, which is often engaging with number calculation. The generation of sums through dice rolls, the fluctuation of numerical resources, the counting of spaces moved, the scrounging for and accounting of modifiers, you know the drill. All of that stuff pulls me out of the narrative waters and into the realm of bean counting. The act of rolling dice introduces uncertainty into outcome determination, which is one of the primary draws of tabletop role-playing games, but I find that bean counting that doesn't mechanically tie in with narrative generation is simply extending the amount of time that I'm out of the pool, drying off, and feeling colder. At most, I, as a player, am psychologically affected because I know that lower hit points means that the next blow my character takes is more likely to kill them, while my character is not mechanically affected at all. In effect, I use my character as a self-insert rather than role-playing my character as someone that is not me. While I can and do put myself back into my character's shoes to roleplay them, I find that phenomenon to be a jarring experience. Role-playing my character feeling hurt or exhausted when there's no mechanical impact on them due to, say, a loss of hit points feels phony to me. My preference is to have a list of negative conditions that come into play based on something occurring in the narrative. I'd probably say that my earliest experience of a game that emphasized this was Mutants and Masterminds. Since that game uses a saving throw mechanic to determine what happens when you take damage, the outcomes were either success or various types of failure, like a graze that affected future damage saving throws, being stunned, being staggered, being incapacitated, etc. Each of those imposed mechanical consequences to the character, each of those imposed mechanical consequences to the character, oftentimes limiting their narrative activities. It's through these changes of state where I found that I can draw the context from which to direct my moment-to-moment roleplay narration, even on something like being grazed. Ooh, I managed to avoid the brunt of that attack, but I'll be less likely to take the next hit and walk away unscathed. With games that primarily use a pool of points as a source of attrition, the only negative mechanical consequence that often occurs is I'm up or I'm down. If that's the case, the saving grace that I see is for the PCs to go down in 3 to 6 hits, for mooks to go down in 1 hit, for henchmen to go down in 2 hits, for antagonists to have the same staying power as the PCs, and for the big bad to have some narrative puzzle to solve and or make some significant sacrifices before the PCs can meaningfully engage with them. All in all, I prefer for the math portion of the game to have a direct impact on the narrative portion of the game and not have it feel like a completely divorced activity. Due to its attempts to emulate a JRPG, Fabula Ultima is very much in the realm of bean counting when it comes to combat. However, having turns go back and forth from the PC's turn to the enemy turn, back to the PC's turn, does create tension, and figuring out how to survive a tough boss fight is tactically satisfying, especially when you successfully study the enemy to learn their status, their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses, and tactics. Yes, all in one turn if you can roll high enough. It's very video gamey, but that's part of the experience, though each character can only do this to a single opponent once per battle. I think it can be said that tabletop role-playing game hobbyists can find themselves immersed in multiple ways. Immersion with the overall narrative, immersion with the combat experience, and immersion with the world as the character, just to name a few. The magic happens when the group can tie in multiple modes of immersion, I suspect, but that can be especially hard to do so in a way that flows naturally. I suspect that's what Luke Crane attempted to do with Burning Wheel and the derivatives that came from it, such as Mouse Guard and Torchbearer, though it resulted in simply being stuck in the weeds of dealing with very involved mechanical processes that ironically led to killing the momentum of the moment-to-moment role-playing. The go-to, therefore, has been this jump from engaging with the narrative to being transported into some form of chessboard with dice, calculators, and accounting, largely devoid of narrative context due to the way the combat system is often designed, and back again into the narrative. So it's just a jarring pulling from one place to another. At the end of the day, however, each of us has their most preferred way to have fun in the hobby. All I would suggest is that if you're stuck into a single style of play, try mixing it up a bit, whether with a new system or with homebrew, for like 3 sessions. Reflect on what you feel about what you felt about that experience and why, and share with others so that we all have a greater understanding of the diversity of experiences in our wonderful hobby of tabletop role-playing. If you like or dislike anything in this video, please give it a like or dislike and leave a comment, keeping it respectful and relevant. Subscribe if you want to support my channel, and if you really want to support my endeavors, head over to my Patreon and become a member. The link is in the description. Until then, folks, take care and play to find out what happens.